Everybody to Pediatrics Grand Rounds. Before we get started, if you could glance at the Zoom invitation, it's got a link there for tracking CME credit, which is really important for us tracking the lecture series, as well as continuing to fund the audiovisual support and the CME support. So even if you're not claiming CME, it really helps us if you could please log in and track your attendance. That would be much appreciated. And I'd also like to say that Dr. Parker today, to our knowledge, has no conflicts of interest. Is that correct, Dr. Parker?
Correct.
Awesome. So today it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Parker. I think most of us know her. She's one of our third-year pediatric residents here at ETSU. Before joining us here, she got both her bachelor in chemistry and her MD up at the Boonshoff School of Medicine at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. And she is returning to Ohio to work in a FQHC down there and practice general pediatrics. So today she's going to speak to us about out in the country. So Dr. Parker.
Hi guys, thanks Dr. Dodd for that introduction, and thank you to Dr. Mills for being my mentor. And I'll kind of start off, big shout out to a bunch of family and friends who kind of helped. They gave me some pieces for this presentation today. So we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about things that are more for country and things to consider when you're out practicing rural medicine. I have no conflicts of interest. I was also asked to put this disclaimer: multiple photos that I'm using throughout this presentation were images willingly given by friends and family, and none of these individuals have ever been my personal patients, and they all knew that I was giving it as a presentation, so they all knew that their kiddos could be put in this presentation. So kind of learning to objectives. So with rural medicine, some things I feel like we don't always hit on very well. Talking about ATVs and UTVs, and then kind of doing some farming stuff. I know Dr. Taylor kind of does the surgical side of it, but kind of going into some of the discussing what are ATVs, what are UTVs, kind of the epidemiology of ATV injuries. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good conglomeration of the data for UTV injuries, so it's kind of hard to track that. What is some anticipatory guidance we should be giving our families in relation to use of ATVs and UTVs? Discussing common farming equipment and animals that our patients can be involved with, as well as kind of some epidemiology of farming accidents and some guidance for our families who live and work on farms. And then just kind of some resources that we as providers can use and also kind of give to our families to kind of better help educate them for their children. So why is this important? So this is kind of a topic that's near and dear to my heart. As you can kind of see, the left side of the slide has headlines of 3 different accidents where different kids were killed in either ATV or tractor injuries. And then on the right is actually a snippet of a news article about a child dying. The one article I couldn't find that I think really drove it home that I wanted to do this is when I was little, there was a toddler in my school district that got lost on the family farm, and they called in everybody. They called in police, they called in the sheriffs, they called in EMS, they called in the firefighters. Multiple departments responded, and we searched that farm up and down, and nobody could find the kid, to having found the toddler hours later having passed away in the manure pit. So just little things that to think about when you're talking to your families. And so that's kind of why this topic's near and dear to me, because it's something I feel like we always focus on what AAP Bright Futures recommends, but we forget that it has the caveat that says, tailor your anticipatory guidance to your family and their personal situation. So this first slide is just kind of some pictures of some examples of ATVs and the UTVs. So appropriately, I have 2 little kiddos on their ATVs. Both are in youth size ATVs. It's actually not uncommon for kiddos and even teenagers to ride adult-size ATVs, which we'll get to in a little bit. And I want to give a good shout out because this kiddo is wearing his helmet like he should. And then these are just examples of what the utility vehicles can look like. There's a wide range of what styles they can be billed as, and so it's going to look a little bit different. So the definition of an ATV is basically a four-wheel vehicle that's designed for off-road use, that is built to be straddled, whereas the UTV is kind of more an off-road motorized vehicle that's also built more for off-road use. So kind of going into some of the statistics about ATV accidents from the nation. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about some data from the Consumer Product Safety Commission report that was released in February of 20. The one thing to note is that technically the most recent data that they could publish is from 2016, just because there is a delay in terms of being able to track all of this data in the country. So in 2016, there were 591 ATV related fatalities, 65 children, 11% of the total were under the age of 16, and of that 45% were under the age of 12. Of the estimated 81,800 ATV related ER treated injuries, an estimated 26% involved our patients under the age of 16. And thankfully, all those who were treated in the ER, 81 were thankfully able to be discharged from the ER. So just to kind of show you, this is a good chart, just kind of breaking it down by age as well as year, kind of tracking how are we doing with seeing ATV related injuries in the ER. If you look by and far, this under 16-year-old category has the most injuries of all of the age groups. Thankfully, we have gotten a little bit better over the years. We're not seeing as many injuries, but we're still disproportionately having the most injuries. And so it's really something I feel we could do a little bit better talking to our families about. Kind of going into a little bit on what's the most likely diagnosis as well as the location. So the most likely diagnosis was a fracture followed by contusions, abrasions, and then most likely injured body part was either an arm or the head and neck. But do keep in mind that this is overall statistics. And we do know that children kind of disproportionately are a little bit top heavy, if you will. So their head and their neck do tend to get a little bit more injuries compared to an adult just because of the ratio of their head relative to the rest of their body. So what are some of the risk factors for someone to be injured or have a fatality when it comes to the use of ATVs and UTVs? By and far, inexperience, excessive speed. So if you have an individual who's racing or jumping with their ATV, their UTV, not using a helmet. ATVs in particular are built with a high center of gravity with a narrow wheelbase, which increases their risk of rollover with turns, and also their suspension system is just not built. And also there's an increased risk of losing control because the tire pressure is designed solely for off-road use, meaning you're not supposed to use it on the public roads. However, 35 states allow the use of ATVs and UTVs on certain public roads, despite the fact that they were built for off-road use. Most states typically leave it to local jurisdiction on the laws and regulations around the use of ATVs and UTVs on public roads. So this chart on the right probably is a little blurry and I apologize, but basically what I want to kind of show you guys out of this is simplifying down Tennessee law. So basically this chart shows you if you have meet the requirements on the right, and there's very specific requirements on what's considered a medium speed vehicle, a low speed vehicle, that you can obtain registration plates for our ATVs and UTVs and drive them on the county roads. But I will say, if you have those registration plates and you're on the public roads, you are supposed to be obeying local traffic laws. One big thing to know, especially since I'm basing this talk partly agriculturally, is if you're on a farm and that ATV or UTV is considered part of your agricultural portion of your entity. So a lot of families have farms, and so the ATV may be listed under their farming equipment. ATVs can be driven on certain public roads without obtaining registration plates as well. So what is some anticipatory guidance we should be talking to our families about the use of ATVs and UTVs? AAP does have a policy statement on this. Their opinion is only those with driver's licenses should be allowed to drive the ATV as well as the UTVs. And at least minimally, we should discuss that off-road vehicles are very dangerous to our youth, particularly those under 16. Just because, let's face it, we know families are going to let their kids do what they want to do, but at least have that open, honest dialogue with them about the fact of paying attention to the safety aspects of, if they're going to choose to do it, making sure how to be safe about it. It's also recommended that an individual wear a motorcycle style helmet while riding, and they should also have eye protection with that helmet. There should be no passengers for our pediatric patients that are riding. There are a few ATVs that are built to have passengers, but really your teenagers are the very easily distractible age range, so passengers are not always ideal from that perspective. Obviously, don't drink and drive. Wear protective reflective clothing so others can see you and also find you in case of emergency. Don't ride after dark, and then use flags, reflectors, and lights to increase the visibility of the ATV or UTV as much as possible. So this is a great little safety guideline from Cultivate Safety, which is a national organization to kind of help with farm safety. And so this kind of literally walks providers and families through how to determine, is a youth safe to complete this job? What are the things that they should be able to do? They need to be able to reach and operate the controls when appropriately sitting in the seat. They need to be able to operate the controls safely in terms of their strength. Can they push the ATV off themselves if they roll and get pinned underneath it? Be able to react quickly and be mature enough to consistently do what is expected of them while they are using this. And then it also goes into, what's the adult responsibilities? What are things they should be doing when allowing the youth to be on the ATV? So complying with outdoor work guidelines, ensuring that the ATV is safe and mechanically sound, verifying that the rider is meeting the rider requirements, aka don't let your 10-year-old ride an adult-sized ATV, because that's not ideal from a size perspective. There are youth ATVs if families so choose to go into them and purchase them. And then it also kind of talks about supervision. So their recommended supervision is only for those 16 years and above. And you should start with the adult always supervising the youth. And then as they show competency, that you can progress to periodic supervision of them. And then to make it fit on the slide well, I kind of snippeted. It also talks about what are the hazards of operating the ATV. So things like the high speed, extra riders, risk of rollover, inattentive driving, colliding with objects are all hazards that can happen when you're operating the ATV, as well as ways to protect yourself. So wearing your helmet with eye protection, wearing non-skid shoes, wearing gloves, and knowing the operator's manual, so knowing and understanding how to properly use the ATV. Similarly, they have also created a recommended guideline for using the utility task vehicles. So, I'm sorry, did somebody say something? Sorry, I thought I heard something. So similarly to the ATV, UTVs, you kind of drive them similar. The one big difference is some of them are built with seatbelts. So really encouraging youth to actively use the seatbelts and making sure that whatever load they might be carrying in the UTV, because that's a lot of the big point of the UTVs, is to haul things like hay or feed, or in this case, they're showing fruits and vegetables in the back of the utility terrain or utility task vehicle, making sure that your load is appropriate for that vehicle. And similarly, continuing to have adults think about what they're letting the youth do and making sure that if they're going to use these on public roads, as a lot of times these vehicles are, making sure they are trying to avoid as much as they can being on the public roads, but if they do have to go on public roads, being safe about it. Similar hazards as to the ATV as well. Sorry. Next I have a little video from Ohio State University's Extension Office to kind of talk about the farm. So fingers crossed it works correctly. Hang on just a second, guys. Sorry. It was working when I tried it earlier.
I'm a farm, the workplace for thousands of families nationwide. I'm loaded with hazards you tend to forget and ignore. I might seem like a quiet, peaceful place, but there are noises all around that can cause you serious harm. My air is not as clean as you may think and can be filled with dust particles that you do not want to inhale. Livestock raised here can get really testy if you don't know how to handle them properly, and machinery operated on my grounds can be very dangerous. PTOs, augers, tractor tires, and other equipment can deal you a fatal blow if you're not paying attention. I have hidden dangers too, like confined spaces and engulfment hazards, and when you let your clutter get out of control, there could be a serious trip hazard in your barn or shop. If you're not keeping safety in mind, the farm can be a dangerous place. Hazards are everywhere. Be aware, get trained, and take action so you can be protected from hazards like me.
So that little video was just to kind of talk about all the different things that you can see on a farm, just because I know not a lot of people are familiar with farms. I happen to grow up with my dad being a hobby farmer, if you will. It wasn't his full-time job, but I grew up raising sheep. I had goats on my farm. We had a tractor, we had a auger, we had the grain bins. And so that's another thing that's important to me, is just making sure people are aware and understand some of this equipment and the animals, just because there is a lot of inherent risk with all of this. So this slide is just to kind of point out different things. So we've got a little kiddo riding in the tractor, and this actually is my dad with a family friend's kid, just to kind of show you like what a tractor can look like. So please ignore the fact that my dad's tractor's old. Tractors are expensive, so that thing is probably 20, 30 years old at this point. And then this picture in the top middle is just to kind of show you how big the equipment can be. This kid is actually sitting in the rim of a combine wheel, which you typically will use for your soybean fields, or your corn fields. And so just kind of wanted to show you relative size. Lawnmowers there on the right, the reason I put that in is technically when you get to the bigger houses, it's not uncommon for people to make their lives a little bit easier. They will buy basically mini tractors complete with a lawnmower attachment, just so they can mow their lawns so much faster, but that also increases the risk of injury. And then the bottom left is to show you a hay baler. So there's some inherent risk with that, as well as kind of showing you what it looks like to have a PTO shaft hooked into a tractor, because that's one huge area that can get a lot of people in trouble if they don't pay attention to what they're wearing in terms of clothing when working with equipment, as well as also if they don't pay attention to what they're doing in general. It can be very dangerous. And then the last picture on the bottom right is actually a tractor hooked up to a hay tedder. And then I got an example of a kiddo picking a pumpkin, because most people don't think about it, but farming for fruits and vegetables also is considered part of the agricultural business. The bottom picture kind of shows you what a big operation farm can look like in terms of having lots of equipment, as well as kind of showing you what grain bins can look like, just because those can be very dangerous and inherently have a lot of risk involved. And then we have my cousin out riding on her sled behind my uncle driving the four-wheeler, just to kind of show you some of the things that sometimes we'll use farming equipment as well as ATVs and UTVs for, that may not always be truly agriculturally related, but something we have to think about. I can flat out tell you, I remember from being a little kid, my dad used to take us all the time every year in Ohio behind the tractor on the sleds. He'd just take us out in the field and pull us around. We also, you have to think about, there's kiddos that start driving tractors at literally 8 years old, because once you've got that clutch on, you just let them run with it. And so thinking about things like that when you're talking to your families. Kind of switching gears to the animal side of things. So I've just kind of got examples of different animals to think about when you're talking with families. So down here, it's pretty common to have horses, beef cattle, dairy cattle, as well as some sheep and goats. Pigs, not so much in this area, just they don't like heat, but there is a little bit. And then I've got examples of chickens and rabbits, just trying to close out the loop on all of our different animals. And so some things you just really have to think about is just the size of the animal. A horse can weigh 2,000 plus pounds, same with beef and dairy cattle. And so you just really have to think about your risk. Some of our kids, when they're 8, 9 years old, they're barely tall enough to hit a horse or a cattle's shoulder, depending on how tall the kiddo is. So you have to think about things like that, as well as what happens if the animal gets mad and starts attacking the kiddo. So kind of going into some agricultural injuries, this is from the National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety. This is from their 2020 fact sheet. 60% of household youth were not working when they were injured in agriculture. In 2018, the US had approximately 2.03 million farms. And in 2014, about 893,000 youth lived on farms, with more than half of them working on their own farms. But then also 265,600 non-resident youth were hired in agricultural in 2014, as well as then you take into account those who visit farms as for fun. So like going to the orchards or going to the pumpkin patches or other farms that they use agriculture related visits as part of their income to help support their farm. So kind of going into kind of fatalities and agriculture related injuries, it's thought to believe that a child dies in an agriculture related injury about once every 3 days. Of the leading sources for fatality among all youth, 47% involve transportation, which includes your tractors, your ATVs, your UTVs. 20% were involved with the contact of machinery, and 13 were involved with violent contact with animals and other humans. And of note, youth under the age of 16 have 12 times the risk of ATV injuries compared to an adult. For youth who were working, from 2001 to 2015, 48% of all fatal injuries to youth workers were specifically in agriculture. And since 2009, youth worker fatalities in agriculture have exceeded all other industries combined. And transportation incidents were the most common fatal events, with tractors and your ATVs and UTVs as the primary vehicle sources. So this just kind of shows you the fatality rates among the industries. So if you can see the AG/F/F/H stands for agricultural, forestry, fishing, and hunting. If you look by and far, that category disproportionately shows the highest fatality rate, specifically for the 15 to 17-year-olds. And then the chart on the right just kind of shows you, and another graph, how by and far agriculture just has a higher fatality rate compared to all the other industries combined. One big thing to note is there's no central repository for childhood agricultural industries. So the sheet that was created by the National Health for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety draws their data as best they can, but it's not 100% accurate. So kind of switching to the non-fatal childhood agricultural injuries, about every day, 33 children are estimated to be injured in agricultural related incidents. In 2014, an estimated 7,469 household youth were injured on a farm, and 60% of them were not working at the time of the injury. And then another 738 hired youth were injured on the farm in 2014, as well as 3,735 visiting youth were injured while they were visiting a farm. Vehicles continued to be the leading source of injury for household working youth, and then animals were a leading source of injury for non-working youth and visitors. And a lot of that has to do with just the inherent risk of some of your bigger animals. And visitors tend to go towards your cattle, your horses, which could be partly why animals were a leading source of injury for non-working and your visitors. And then the bottom just kind of shows the charts for kind of all kinds of injuries, and then as well as household youth. And then the chart on the right kind of breaks it down by age range. And if you look by and far, for farming related injuries, it's your under 10-year-old group that has the highest rate of injuries. So just to kind of show you why I feel this is important, even here in Tennessee, since Ohio is a little bit bigger in terms of agriculture relative to Tennessee, there are 66,600 farms in Tennessee alone. 98% of them are owned by families, and of those farms, 95% are considered small family farms. So the top commodities that are produced by these farms here in Tennessee are soybeans, cattle, chicken, as well as dairy products. And on the right just kind of shows you the 2017 Census of Agriculture, kind of the county profile for what Washington County looks like. There are 1,428 farms in the county, with most farms averaging around 74 acres. And then we've got a little bit disproportionate. Most of the state is actually more on the crop production, but our county happens to be more geared towards livestock, poultry, and produce compared to crops. And I think a lot of it has to do with just kind of our landscape. We're a very mountainous region. That makes it very difficult to farm crops, and much more it's easier to farm your livestock because you can just let them roam. They'll fill the hills as much as they want. But I also looked at Carter County and Sullivan County, and they had similar statistics to Washington County in terms of farms. And then this is another video. I apologize. I'm gonna see if I can get it to work as well.
I'm a PTO, the power takeoff on your tractor. I can spin up to 1,000 times a minute and provide the power your machinery needs while you are working around the farm or in the fields. You hardly know the safety risks and injuries I can cause. When you fail to keep me properly shielded, I could have exposed wrap points. And well, that's just too bad, because when I'm still spinning and you bend over to check my connection, I can take your loose-fitting clothing and wrap you up in less than a minute. If you're not keeping safety in mind, this could happen to you. Hazards are everywhere. Be aware, get trained, and
so that was just a little video showing the power takeoff shaft, and I just wanted to kind of show, I use that as an example of how fast things can happen on a farm in terms of you blink an eye and accidents or injuries can happen. And the power takeoff shaft happens to be one of the most quick to be fatal because of the fact of most of the time, if you're working with a PTO shaft, even some of our youth will be out using the tractor with the manure spreaders or other farming equipment, and their adults will trust that they know how to do it because they've supervised them for years, and so they trust them to know what they're doing, and that can be very deadly if you don't pay attention, making sure you're turning off your PTO shaft before you check on things if it's not wanting to run right. So that's just one thing I wanted to show. And OSU Extension actually happens to have a lot of different safety videos if you want to kind of look further into it. They've got a series of about 10 videos on kind of different safety things on the farm to kind of be thinking about. That's really great for kind of showing to families and little kids because it is kind of geared both for adults and for youth. So what are some of the hazards on the farm? As I kind of already alluded to, your machinery, so your tractors, your combines, your ATVs, your UTVs, your rakers, your balers, your tedders in terms of equipment for making hay, your manure spreaders, your feed grinders, chemicals, your orchards and your vegetable farmers probably, as well as some of your other crop farmers, have pesticides. So you have to think organophosphate poisoning for kids at times. There's a lot of electrical equipment and all of this machinery and just the general electrical equipment that you have when you have buildings that you have to think about. Farms are more likely to have firearms. So making sure that you talk about firearm safety with our families. In terms of animals, we kind of already talked. So you got your cattle, your beef and your dairy, your horses, your sheep, your goats, your fowl, in terms of your chickens, your ducks, your turkeys, and then rabbits. The noise level on a farm. This machinery is very loud and very deafening, and it's not common for most people to wear hearing protection. So it's not uncommon for people in their 30s, 40s to have had significant hearing loss having worked on a farm their whole life. As well as your grain bins, your silos, and your augers to kind of run the grain bins and silos and move your grain around for the equipment. So what is some anticipatory guidance we should be doing for related to farming? So as I kind of alluded to earlier, Bright Futures actually recommends tailoring anticipatory guidance based off the patient's age as well as the risk of the local community in which one practices. I also put poison controls number, although I just realized, I apologize, I missed my last two. So making sure families that have the pesticides, the feeds, the medicines for your livestock, making sure they know how to call poison control if they think their child's got an ingestion or is acting strange. Making sure families keep a first aid kit complete with unexpired supplies around at their house in case of emergencies. Also ensuring parents are assigning tasks that are appropriate to youth developmental level. It's not uncommon for families to be like, well, you've been doing it since you're 8, you're totally allowed at 10 to carry around a 50-pound feed sack and lift hay bales and throw them around. And that may not be developmentally appropriate because you're increasing the risk of injury to the patient. And other things to know is the importance of good hand hygiene. When you're talking about working with animals, you've got all of the infections that you can get from them. So like cattle, it's associated with E. coli, O17, or excuse me, E. coli in general, as well as your brucellosis, your rabbits is your tularemia. I have seen plenty of hand, foot, and mouth disease in my sheep multiple times, and you just really have to have very good hygiene, keeping everything clean. And also same goes with your crops, just because there's a lot of dust particles. Some other things to know when you're talking to your families about anticipatory guidance: if the youth lives on a family-owned farm, they're not protected by child labor laws. So when you think about the protections that we have made and the strides we have done to protect against youth in regards to labor, that from where we were in the 1800s and early 1900s, those protections don't apply if it's your family farm. So families can have their kiddos up at 4 in the morning up till midnight. They can have them do anything that they want, and it's not protected by child labor laws. And actually, child labor laws do allow youth starting at age 12 to work in agricultural related positions. There's some requirements that they have, but that is one of the youngest age groups that you can start letting work. And I will say too, in farming communities, it's not uncommon for teenagers to do under the table cash helping with chores like baling, and it's very big in the summer. If you've got to put up all your hay, well, call up the local youth who wants to make a little cash. And so some things like that are things to think about when you're talking to your families. So this is a great kind of diagram to kind of talk about why farming is great, but some ways to make it safe, because the farm is an inherently dangerous process. And this is also from Cultivate Safety as well. And it breaks it down by developmental age. So it breaks it down from your 6 to 23 months in terms of what are we looking for in terms of their development, to kind of help parents understand like where are they at developmentally, as well as some safety strategies, like they are the group that needs constant supervision. If you're going to leave them in an area, you need to make sure it's a fenced in area that they can be kind of contained in. Keep them away from the machinery unless you were the one intentionally being with them, and preferably making sure the machinery is not moving, or they're going to be in a safe place if the machinery is moving. Keeping the chemicals and sharp objects out of their reach. Following play, making sure that hygiene is, they're doing very good in terms of their hand washing and keeping their clothes clean. So they gave suggestions on what's age appropriate outdoor play activities. So your rattles and your music makers, your swings, balls to toss around. You can have your kiddos have toys that are hammers and pounding so they can mimic their family members, because we all know, especially once your kiddo gets mobile, they like to mimic the adults. And so creating little outdoor opportunities that will let them safely mimic what you're doing is a great way to do it. And then going down into your 2 to 5 year olds, obviously they are a rambunctious bunch that, depending on the age, they may want to play alone or with others. This is the pretend play category. They do start imaginative thinking, but they still don't recognize your dangers. So you still need to have constant supervision. They'll be wanting to help the family with their activities. And so it's kind of the balance of providing them opportunities to do things that are age and developmentally appropriate. This is kind of where that key comes back into doing things that are age appropriate. So like letting your 4-year-old carry your tagging supplies. So for animals, you put tags in so you can identify your animals, letting them carry the parts that are not dangerous. So not the tagger itself, but letting them carry like the tags and your pencil and your paper that they will need to be able to kind of keep all your records. Not leaving your keys in the ignition of your equipment and keeping it in safe places that are out of their reach so they can't start up the tractor and make it go run by itself, or the lawnmower, or your ATVs. So play ideas for them are the swing sets, also still balls to throw and catch. They can do sandboxes. If they're old enough to want to play group games, you can do Duck, Duck, Goose, Play Kitchen. You can create a tire jungle for climbing, and letting them play with toy tractors and trucks. Going into kind of your older groups, so your 6 to 8 year olds, they're still not fully developed in terms of their coordination. They do tend to ask parental approval a lot. They are not abstract thinkers. And so they need patience, and they are a very curious bunch within a short attention span that likes to remain active. And so things to remember, they will want to impress the adults, but they're not ready for significant responsibilities. Parents need to set boundaries for a safe play area and reinforce their rules that they set forth, making sure that if needed, so if they're going to go ride their bike, or they're going to go, if the family chooses to let them ride a youth-sized ATV, making sure they have their safety equipment on, making sure they're washing their hands after they're done playing. This age group's great for your bicycles. You can, if you have a tree house at the house, go for it. Let them play in it. Let them play on the swing set. Play group games if they've got friends over. And then your 9 to 10-year-olds do have better coordination, but they will still have awkward moments. They want peer and social acceptance. They desire to be independent from the adults, and so they will want to do activities without the adult doing it next to them. Allowing them to have successes are important for them. And so their body strength and dexterity is also increasing, but they still don't fully recognize the consequences of their actions, and therefore will take some risk. So this group, you can start to let them have a little bit more independence in terms of you don't have to have constant supervision as long as they're doing something that's considered low risk. So playing out on the swing set, arts and crafts, but still making sure you're setting forth and enforcing your rules of boundaries of where can they stay with their area for play, rewarding them for their good behavior, making sure they're staying away from where someone else is working if they're working with farming equipment, or making sure they're staying away from the animals on the farm. And instructing, so if you're working on a farm and you have other workers out on the farm, making sure that they know that they need to push the children to go back to the play area if they are found where they're not supposed to be. And as always, just kind of really good hand washing. So this age group, you can kind of start doing your sports, your monkey bars. If it's winter and you got snow, build some snow forts, build some snowmen, go have a snowball fight. Also, summertime's a great time to let them play around in the sprinklers and things like that, as well as just some ball games. So these are a couple examples of some anticipatory guidance. Cultivate Safety has a large variety of anticipatory guidance that walks you through so many different things. This is just a couple examples, and it's all laid out very similar. It's always kind of like I showed you with the ATV and the UTV. It's always, what are the requirements for the youth to be able to safely do the job? What are the parental adult responsibilities? And then what are the hazards and ways to be safer about going about it, as well as your supervision. I picked haying and kind of disconnecting and connecting your implements, as that's going to be a little bit more common in this region since we are livestock based mostly down here, which means, well, you got to feed your livestock in the winter, and a common thing to feed them is hay. So you do a lot of hay baling in the summer. And so making sure things are wearing appropriate clothing for the weather, as well as to making sure they're not having loose clothes, because if they're the one operating the tractor, you don't want it to get caught in any equipment. Having good peripheral vision. They need to be able to stay focused for at least 50 minutes at a time. Need to know that they need to make sure that no one else is around, or if they are working with someone else within the close vicinity, especially for people that are square baling. It's not uncommon for one person to be driving the tractor and another to be on the hay wagon, stacking the hay as it comes off the baler. So paying attention, making sure that person that's on the wagon is staying safe while they're on the wagon, especially because farming equipment is expensive. People do not buy farm equipment until they absolutely have to. And a lot of the older farm equipment, the safety is just not there compared to the newer equipment. And so that's something to think about. And then kind of talking about your connecting and disconnecting your implement. So hooking up your trailers, your PTO shaft, your hydraulics required to be able to operate the machinery, actually is very similar in terms of haying operations, in terms of what are the requirements for the youth to be able to do it safely. But one big thing is they also need to be able to lift things safely using a proper lifting technique. So One thing you have to worry about is making sure youth don't just try to upper body strength through doing objects. Use their knees, use their back, and use proper techniques so that way they don't injure their back or their arms. And be able to complete multi-step processes correctly. And also just keep in touch with others that way, from a safety perspective, that way everybody knows what's going on and can kind of keep an eye on each other and protect them. So these two kind of handouts are more kind of showing working with animals and fruit and vegetable harvesting, excuse me. So the left for the large animals, what are your hazards? So your kicks, your weight, being in confined spaces with animals. So remembering to pay attention to your proper barriers. Steel-toed roots are great things, especially for your animals that are bigger. So your cattle, your horses, even your sheep and your goats and your pigs, just because they can step on you and break a toe pretty quick, as well as making sure you wash your hands real good, because they can pass on illnesses to humans, just like anyone else can pass something on to you. And so some of the hazards, so animal kicks, they can break a bone pretty quick, as well as confinement is increasing your risk of injury, because if an animal gets mad and starts attacking you and becoming aggressive, if you're in a confined space and you don't know how to quickly and safely get out of the space to protect yourself, that could be very dangerous, and especially if you're alone and no one's within hollering distance to be able to have someone respond. So kind of switching gears to your fruit and farming harvesting. So they use a lot of sharp instruments. You're out in the sun working many hours a day trying to maximize your return for what you get, as well as it's a repetitive motion, so it increases your risk of injury. So remembering to make sure you're doing proper body movements, lifting with your legs and your back, not just your arms, wearing non-skid shoes, that way you're not slipping and sliding if it's muddy out in the field, and as well good hand washing for the same reasons. So this is just kind of a plug. A lot of our rural communities, the firefighters and EMS do get training in terms of delivering agricultural safety and health. So they get special training in how to do grain bin rescues, how to deal with an agricultural structure fire, how to deal with the fact of farming equipment on fire, because it does require a little bit different response, just because of the inherent nature of what the equipment and the animals are. And so it takes both the farmers as well as our local responders. So I just wanted to give a plug to them, because that's an important aspect to kind of think about, especially if you're on the receiving end at the ER. Your EMS hopefully will have had at least some training to kind of help in agricultural related injuries. So what are some great resources for more information? So Cultivate Safety is where I borrowed a lot of my anticipatory guidance. All of those handouts are very great and very kind of succinct and to the point. They do have some of the anticipatory guidance in Spanish and French. So if you have families that are not great English speakers, but speak French or Spanish, sometimes you can use those and give it to them in a language they can understand, especially because we do know that it's not uncommon for migrant farm workers to come up from other countries. So making sure they're helping keep their families safe. National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety is a great resource, as well as the National Farm Medicine Center. There is a journal of agro-medicine, so things related to farming injuries, how to make our farms safe. It is geared more towards the adults, and there's not a lot of research going on, unfortunately, into agricultural-based medicine, just because that's just not as big of a priority right now. The USDA has great resources. And then there are a number of universities throughout the US that have a lot of great agricultural resources for families. Ohio State University is one of them, University of Kentucky, University of Wisconsin, University of Minnesota, UC Davis, Penn State University, and University of Washington, to name a few. I looked at University of Tennessee's. It wasn't nearly as robust as some of the other universities listed, but it also does have some resources too. So these are just kind of some references. And then big shout out, this is my little guy back in the fall for Halloween. He was a little farmer. What questions do you guys have about farming or ATV and UTV, kind of anticipatory guidance?
Hey, Amy. I thought that was an awesome presentation about a topic that I think presents a risk to our patients and we don't talk about a lot. So thank you for putting that together. I personally was driven over by a tractor when I was 3 years old, so I can attest that maybe a little anticipatory guidance is warranted. I was wondering, in your resources, I know you mentioned kind of some of the environmental risks in terms of like acute poisonings and like more acute dangers. Are there any good resources for like longer term dangers, like long term exposure to pesticides or some of the farming chemicals or like dust from hay or dirt?
I didn't see any. I didn't go digging too hard to look into those, but I would bet that probably like your Journal of Agri-Medicine has probably looked into that. I know a lot of that study has probably been geared more towards your adults because they know that's where the noise damage is going to be seen. The damage from all the dust has been seen. I do know from the youth perspective, there are some places that argue that farming and being on a farm and the farm exposures to all the different allergens decreases a child's risk of allergies.
Yeah.
But I don't know to what extent. I didn't go finding those specific numbers. I apologize. That was
Oh, no.
where I went digging.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think there are probably some health benefits, but also some maybe long-term risks. So.
I agree with Dr. Dodd, Amy. Thanks for an awesome presentation. It really is something we don't think of often and remember to counsel. So thanks for all the handouts too on the counseling. I think that's great. One of the things that really struck me was this riding the ATV or riding those other type of vehicles on a regular road. And you see it done so often that it's really not even funny. I think it's important to remember that and make sure that we're counseling. Yesterday evening, in fact, I was entering my subdivision and the boy looked about 12, riding a golf cart with another friend next to him, riding a scooter, and it was dark and, just like the whole gamut of all the problems with that just really sent shivers down my spine. You could barely see them in the dark. They were riding things that they were not supposed to be riding and trying to follow each other. And, it's just, they put everybody at risk, let alone themselves. And I think it's really important to counsel families on this.
Yeah, and I will say farming is one of those 24/7 operations. So the job's got to get done, and it's not unanticipated that sometimes youth are still out there at midnight out farming, and they've been up since 6 a.m. out on the farm. I know growing up, a couple of my classmates, like the school had a policy of you got X amount of excused absences to go work on the family farm. And so it would not be uncommon during planting season or harvest season that they would just be like, okay, I'm not here today. I'm out working on the family farm. And they'd go work 12 plus hours out running the machinery. And they'd run it after dark, right in the middle of the day, and drive the equipment up and down the roads. And the other thing is too, people have to remember for those that are driving on the public road. So if you're driving your tractors and stuff, is also remembering public courtesy. Tractors don't drive fast. They top out at about 35 miles an hour. So even just your standard drivers, you have to remember some patience. Tennessee roads are not built to pass. So a little patience goes a long way in keeping everybody safe, because your tractor probably will try to get over when they have somewhere safely to pull over. But to be patient for those who are driving in regular vehicles around the farming equipment too also goes a long way. Any other questions?
It's Dr. Mills. I was never run over, Will, but I did run over a few things and with tractors. So, and fell out of barns and had a wonderful tobacco spearing event. So I thought Amy's presentation was just so awesome for our region. If you're not from here, these are the kids you're taking care of. And there's tragedy and there's joy with it, but you all might be shocked about what kids actually get away with, and they're not just driving golf carts in neighborhoods like Dr. J was worried about. So it does behoove us to do anticipatory guidance and know what we're talking about. So Amy was right on target with this one. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Dr. Mills. Anyone else have any other questions or comments? Well, if not, thank you guys for joining. I greatly appreciate you guys listening to my discussion. And again, I know most of my friends and families are not on this conversation, but a big shout out to them for letting me use their pictures of their kiddos, because I did want to make it a little more personable. So big thank you again to them. All right. Bye, everybody.